This is J. Krishnamurti's fifth public talk in Ojai, California, 1966.
I should think one of our greatest problems in life must be surely knowing that our minds deteriorate, decline as one grows older, or deteriorate even when one is quite young, being a specialist along a certain line and being unaware totally of the whole complex area of life. It must be a great problem to find out whether it is at all possible to stop this deterioration, so that the mind is always fresh, young, clear, decisive. And is it at all possible to end this decline? This evening, further, I would like to go into that. Because meditation is freeing the mind from the known. And to inquire into this question, which is really very, very important, one must, it seems to me, know or be aware the whole machinery of the formation of image which each one of us has about himself or about another, and not only be aware of that machinery that makes these images, but also how we add to those images that we have about ourselves. Because it is these images that gradually begin to crystallize, become hard. And the whole of life, which is a constant movement, constant flow. And this crystallization, this process of hardening of the image is the central fact of deterioration. One notices, obviously, that the brain cells themselves, as one grows older, burdened with innumerable experiences, hurts, many strains, conflicts, despair, the competitive process of life, all these and other factors bring about a lack of sensitivity in the brain cells themselves that one sees as one grows older. And one sees also when one is quite young a mind trained along a special line, completely concentrated on that line, and avoiding the whole area of this extraordinary life, makes these brain cells also very narrow, very small, being unaware of the whole total movement of life, which is the modern education, which is the modern way of living. And it is not only with the young, but also as one grows or advances in years, one notices this, the sharpness, the clarity, the precision, the capacity to think impersonally, to look at life not always from one center, whether that center is noble or ignoble, that's irrelevant. A self-appointed center. And from that, gradually, the crystallization of the whole brain cells and the whole mental process declines. And one is then ready for the grave. And the question then arises, is it at all possible to end this decaying process of this brain as well as of the mind, the whole total entity? And also that it's possible to keep the physique, the body, extraordinarily alive, alert, energetic, and so on. So that seems to me a great issue, and therefore a challenge to find out. Now, the inquiry into this, not only verbally, but non-verbally, the inquiry, the examination into this, is meditation. Because that word itself is so misused. There is so many methods of meditation, especially coming out of Asia, the Zen form of meditation, the Hindu, and the dozens of ways of meditation. If we understand one, we shall understand the total systems and the ways of meditation. But the central issue that we are going to talk over together this evening is this, that whether the mind can ever rejuvenate itself. Whether it can become fresh, young, unafraid. And if one asserts that it is not possible, one is actually then blocking oneself. All examination ceases when you say it's not possible, or when you say it is possible. Either the positive denial of saying that it is not possible, or saying, well, it is possible. Both, it seems to me, are irrelevant, and they block all examination. But the fact remains that as one grows older, that the mind does decline. It declines because one sees that the whole process of thinking, the structure of the brain, and the totality of the whole process, which is the mind, is a way of conflict, struggle, and constant strain, a self-contradictory process. Now, if I may point out here, I think it would be good to find out how you are listening to what is being said. Because we are not concerned with ideas. One can go on with innumerable ideas, adding them, writing about them, reading about them. There are volumes upon volumes about thought and what its process and so on and so on. And there are all these psychologists who have theories about all this, all statistical facts and so on. Are we listening to a series of words or phrases or ideas, or are we listening, observing the actual state of our own mind? And I think that's very important, especially when we are talking about something which is beyond argumentation, of opinion, personal inclination, of personal outlook. The fact is that there is deterioration. And if one looks at it and translates that deterioration or tries to transcend it or go beyond it in terms of personal inclination, temperament, and so on, it becomes a very shoddy affair. But if one observes it, as you would observe a tree, a sunset, light on the water, the outlines of a blue hill, just to observe it, just to observe the process of what is actually taking place in each one of us. Then we will go together. And if you cannot do this, there will be gaps, and you will not be able to take the road together. And also this requires a sustained attention, not for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, for this whole hour. And whether one can be so alert, attentive, not only to what is being said, but also to relate what is being said to your own activity inside of yourself, then such listening has an extraordinary action. But if you merely listen to ideas or words, then you can have this idea or that idea, accept this opinion or that opinion. We're not dealing with opinions. That only leads to dialectical approach. But what we are talking about is something entirely different. We are concerned with the whole total process of living. And this total process of living, as one observes, is always creating an image about ourselves, about others. Image through experience. Image through conflict. This image is added to or taken away, but the central factor of that energy which creates that image is always constant. And is it at all possible to go beyond it? And are we aware that there is an image in each one of us about ourselves, conscious or unconscious? I mean, one might think, one might have an image about oneself as superior, as or not having a capacity, or aggressive, pride, all kinds of nuances, subtleties, which build up this image. Surely each one has this image about oneself. And as one grows older, it might that age has nothing really to do with it. One has an image when one is very, very young. And that image begins to get more and more strong and more crystallized, and then there is the end of it all. So is one aware of it? And if one is aware of it, who is the entity that is aware of the image? You understand the issue? Is the image different from the image maker? Or the image making and the image are the same? Because unless one understands this factor very clearly, what we are going into will not be clear. You understand? I perceive I have an image about myself. I am this and that, I am a great man or a little man, or I am, my name is known, not known, God, all the verbal structure about oneself and the non-verbal structure about oneself. Conscious or hidden. And I realize that image exists. If at all I become aware, watchful, I know there is this image is being formed all the time. the observer who is aware of that image feels himself different from the image. Isn't that what's taking place? Right? I hope we are making this clear. And the observer then begins to either say to himself that this image is the factor that brings about a deterioration, therefore I must destroy the image in order to achieve a greater result, to make the mind young, fresh, and all the rest of it. Because he realizes this image is the central factor of deterioration. And therefore he makes an effort to get rid of that image. Right? Are we going along together? And he struggles, he explains, he justifies, or adds, strives to alter it to a better image, moves it to a different dimension or to a different part of that field which he calls life. So the observer then is concerned with either the destruction of that image or adding to that image or going beyond that image. This is what we are doing all the time. And one has never stopped to inquire whether the observer is not the image maker. And therefore the observer is the image. Right? And therefore, when there is this factor very clearly understood, which is non-verbal but actual, that the observer is the maker of the image. And whatever the observer does not only destroys the present image he has about himself, but also he creates another image. And so keeps this making of images all the time going, struggling, compelling, controlling, suppressing, altering, adjusting. But when one sees this observer is the observed, then all effort ceases to change the image or go beyond the image. This demands a great deal of penetration and attention. It isn't just you accept an explanation. Because the explanation, the word is not the fact. And to realize this, if I may take the coat off. To realize the central fact eliminates all effort. And this is very important to understand. And effort, struggle in different ways, either physically or psychologically, as competition, as ambition, aggression, violence, pride, accumulated resentments, and so on, is one of the factors of deterioration. So when one realizes that the observer is the image maker, then our whole process of thinking undergoes a tremendous change. And so the image is the known. You may not be aware of it. You may not be aware of the content of the image, the shape of it, the peculiar nuances, subtleties of that image. And that image, whether one is conscious of it or not, is in the field of the known. Right? Perhaps we can answer the question afterwards. For the moment, we'll go on with what we're talking about. So, as long as the brain, as long as the whole mind, in which is the mind, brain and the body, the whole mind, functions within the field of the image, which is the known, of which one may be conscious or not, in that field is the factor of deterioration. Right? Please don't accept it as an idea which you will think about when you go home. You won't anyhow. But I mean, here we are doing it, taking the thing together. Therefore you must do it now, not when you go home and say, well, I've taken notes and I've understood it, I'll think about it. Don't take notes, because that doesn't help at all. So that is the field in which the mind functions, always within the field of the known. And the known is the image, whether created by the intellect or by lots of sentimental, emotional, romantic, all that. And so the problem then is whether the mind, which is the result of time, psychological and chronological, which is the result of 1,000 experiences, which is the result of so many stresses and strains, of technological knowledge, of hope, of despair, all that a human being goes through. The innumerable forms of fear. All that functions always within that field, which is the field of the known. The known, I'm using that word, which may be there, but you have not looked at it. Therefore, it is, but still it's known. It's the known. Now, as long as its activity, its thoughts, its movement is within the field of the known, which is the making of the image, there must be deterioration. Do what you will. So the question arises, is it possible to empty the mind of the known? You understand? Am I making myself clear? Doesn't matter. One must have asked this question vaguely or with a purpose, because one suffers, one has anxieties, whether it's possible to go beyond, or one has vague hints of it. Now we are asking it, we are asking it as a question which must be answered, as a challenge which must be responded to. And this challenge is not an outward challenge, but a psychological inward challenge. And we're going to find out whether it is possible to empty the mind of the known. I've explained what I mean, what we mean by the known. Now, to this process of emptying the mind, this emptying of the mind is meditation. And one must go into this question of meditation. Explain it a little bit. All the Asiatic people are conditioned by this word. So-called religious, serious people are conditioned by this word. Because through meditation they hope to find something which is not, which is something beyond mere daily existence. And to find it, they have various systems, very, very subtle or very crude, like the Zen. The discipline, the forcing, the beating. Or watching, tremendously being aware of the toe, and then to see how it moves, to be conscious of it all, and so on and on and on in different ways. And also in that so-called meditative systems is concentration, fixing the mind on one idea or one thought or one symbol and so on, which every schoolboy does when he reads a book, when he is forced to read. And there's not much difference between the student in the school and the very deep thinker who tries tremendously to concentrate on one idea or one image and try to discover some reality out of that. And also, there are various forms of stimulation. Forcing oneself, stimulating oneself to reach a point from which you see life totally differently. And that is to expand consciousness more and more through will, through effort, through concentration, through determination to force. And by extending this consciousness, one hopes to arrive at a different state or a different dimension, or reach a point which the conscious mind cannot. Or one takes many, many drugs, including the latest, LSD and so on, that gives for the moment, tremendous stimulation to the whole system. And in that state, one experiences extraordinary things. Extraordinary things through stimulation, through concentration, through discipline, through starvation, fasting. If one fasts for some days, one has obviously peculiar things happening. And one takes drugs, and that for the moment makes the body extraordinarily sensitive. You see colors which are most extraordinary, which you have never seen before. You see everything so clearly. There is no space between you and that thing which you see. And this goes on in various forms throughout the world. The repetition of words, like in the Catholic, or in those prayers, which all make the mind a little calm, quiet. Obviously, which is a trick. If you keep on repeating, you get so dull. Obviously, you go to sleep and you think that's very quiet mind. And that's it, please. So, and there are very many systems, both in Asia, which include India, and in Europe, where to quieten the mind. One goes through extraordinary tortures to still the mind. But the mind can be stilled very simply by taking a tranquilizer, a pill that will put you to semi-awake but quiet. But that's not meditation. So one can brush all that aside. Even though one is committed to it, we can throw all that out of the window. And as you are listening, I hope you'll throw it out. Because we are going to something much deeper than these inventions. Whether it is the inventions of a very clever mind, which has had a peculiar experience, the other experience, and so on, so on. We can really, having examined it, not in too much detail, but sufficiently, one can put all that aside. Because the more one practices a discipline, the more the mind becomes dull, mechanized. And that mechanizing routine process makes the mind somewhat quiet. But it is not the quietness of tremendous energy understanding. So, having brushed those aside as immature, utterly nonsensical, though they produce extraordinary results, then we can proceed to inquire whether it's at all possible to free the mind from the known. Not only the known of 1,000 years, but also of yesterday. The memory, which is memory. Which doesn't mean that I forget the way to the house that we live in, or technology. That obviously one must have. That's essential, otherwise we can't live. But we are talking of things, something much at a deeper level. The deeper level where the image is always active. The image, which is the known, is functioning all the time. And whether that image and the maker of the image, which is the observer, whether it's possible to empty the mind of that. And emptying of that, of the known, is meditation. And we're going to go into that a little bit, because this, I don't know if you have the energy or the attention, sustained attention to go so far. One sees very clearly that there is an understanding and an action only when the mind is completely quiet. Right? That is, I say I understand something, or I see something very clearly when the mind is totally silent. Right? Indeed. You tell me something, and you're telling me something which I don't like or like. If I like, I pay little attention. If I don't like, I don't pay any attention at all. Or I listen to what you're saying and translate it according to my idiosyncrasy, to my inclination, and so on, so on, so on. Justifying and so. I don't listen at all. Or I oppose what you're saying, because I have an image about myself, and that image reacts. Please, I hope you're doing all this. And so, I don't listen, I don't hear, I object, I defend, I'm aggressive. But all that obviously prevents me from understanding. You understand? I want to understand you. I can only understand you when I have no image about you. And if you're a total stranger, I don't care. I don't even want to understand you, because you're totally outside the field of my image, and I have no relationship with you. But if I find a relation and so on, husband, wife, and all the rest of it, I have an image. And the image I have, and you have about me, and I have about you, in those images have relationship. And all our relationship is based on that. And one sees very clearly that only when the image doesn't interfere, image as knowledge, thought, emotion, all the rest of it, interfere, that I can look, I can hear, I can understand. It has happened to all of us. When suddenly you discuss, argue, point out, and so on, suddenly your mind becomes quiet, and you see that, you say, by Jove, I've understood. That understanding is an action, not an idea. Right? So, there is understanding, action, only action in a different sense than the action that we know, which is the action of the image of the known. We are talking of an understanding which is an action when the mind is completely quiet, in which understanding as action takes place, right? there is understanding and action only when the mind is completely quiet. And that quiet, still mind is not induced by any discipline, by any effort. Obviously, if there is an effort, it is the effort of the image to go beyond itself and create another image. You know all the tricks of that. So one sees that there is an understanding action only when the mind is quiet. And that quietness is not induced, is not projected, is not brought about by careful, cunning thought. And meditation then is, which one can do when you're sitting in the bus, walking the street, or washing dishes, I don't know what else. And meditation has nothing whatsoever to do with breathing and all that. You know, we have brushed all that aside long ago. Or taking postures, you know, all that childish stuff. Then one asks, when the observer is the image, and therefore there is no effort to change the image or to accept the image, but only the fact of what is. And the observation of that fact of what is brings about a radical change in the fact itself. And that can only take place when the observer is the observed. If there is nothing mysterious about it, the mystery of life is beyond all this. Beyond the image, beyond effort, beyond the centralized, egotistic, subjective, self-centered activity. There is a vast field of something which can never be found through the known. And the emptying of the mind can only take place non-verbally, only when there is no observer as the observed. All this demands tremendous attention, awareness. An awareness which is not concentration. You know, concentration is focusing upon a particular page, an idea, image, symbol, and so on, so on. Which is, concentration is a process of exclusion. You know, it's tell a student, don't look out of the window, pay attention to the book. And so he wants to look out, but he forces himself to look. Look at the page. So there is a conflict. And this constant effort to concentrate is a process of exclusion, which has nothing to do with awareness. Awareness takes place, which is very simple when everybody can do, which is to observe. Observe not only what is the outer, this tree, what people say, what one thinks, and so on outwardly, but also inwardly, to be aware, without choice. Just to observe without choosing. For when you choose, when choice takes place only when there is confusion, not when there is clarity. So, takes place only when there is no choice, or when you are aware of all the conflicting choices, conflicting desires, the strains, just to observe all this movement of contradiction. And knowing that the observer is the observed. And therefore, in that process there is no choice at all, but only watching what is. And that's entirely different from concentration. And that awareness brings a quality of attention. In which there is neither the observer nor the observed. When you really attend, if you have we all do sometimes, completely attend. Like when you're now, if you are really listening, there is neither the listener nor the speaker. And in that state of attention is silence. And that state of attention brings about an extraordinary freshness, young youth, not youth, in America they use that word terribly. The extraordinary sense of freshness, quality of newness to the mind. And this emptying of the mind with all the experiences it has had is meditation. And experience, though one has had 1,000 experiences, and we are the result of millions of experiences, and that can be emptied only, all the experiences, when each experience, one becomes aware of it, sees the whole content of it, without choice, and therefore it goes, it passes by. Therefore there is no mark of that experience, as a wound, as something to remember, to recognize and keep. So meditation is a very strenuous process. It's not just a thing to do for old ladies or men who have nothing to do. This demands tremendous attention, right through. Then you will find for yourself, no, there is no question of experience, there is no finding. Then when the mind is completely quiet, without any form of suggestion, as hypnotism or following a method, when the mind is completely quiet, then there is a quality and a different dimension of which thought can never possibly imagine or experience. Then it's beyond all search. There is no seeking. A mind that is full of light does not seek. It's only the dull, confused mind that's always seeking and hoping to find. What it finds is the result of its own confusion. Is it worthwhile talking about all this, questioning, asking? Yes? Yeah, all right, go ahead.
So, I wonder, when we, in this state, how we are now, full of images and so on, how you explain. If this dullness of the mind is only the result of constant produced images or of wrong living habits, wrong eating, for instance, and thinking and so on.
I don't quite follow your question, sir. Make it brief, sir, because I have to repeat the question.
I mean, if we get a power mind only, a deteriorate mind, through produce images, on one hand, also on wrong living habits.
Of course, sir, I included all that. The questioner asks is not the deterioration, has not deterioration two factors. Not only the image making factor, but also the wrong way of living, wrong food and so on, obviously. No, it's clear, isn't it? And to live, all this demands such extraordinary sensitivity, both of the body and of the mind. They're not that the two are separate. And there is a separateness which one cannot possibly understand unless one goes into this question of observe and observe. So, obviously, how one lives, what one thinks, what are one's daily activities, angers, all the rest of it.
The images, the knowledge, as you say, or the conscious, is it fitting to examine together here now the non-image, or the unknown, or the unconscious?
What, sir? I haven't understood the question.
Would it be fitting to examine together here now the non-image areas, the unknown, or the unconscious?
Can we examine, the questioner asks, the state which is not brought about through the image, or examine the unconscious? As we said the other day, actually there is no state as the unconscious. Sorry. I mean, one has dreams. One never ask oneself, why does one have dreams at all? One has dreams, if one has overeaten and all that, that's all right, that's clear. But all those dreams which need interpretation and, all the fuss they make about dreams. Why do you dream at all? Is it possible not to dream? And so that when you wake up, the mind is fresh, clear, innocent. One dreams because during the day you have not paid attention. You have not watched what you have said, what you have thought, what you have felt, how you have talked to another. You have not watched the sky, the tree, the beauty of, so much. You haven't watched. And so, all this field which has not been examined, watched, looked, naturally projects in that state of the mind when it is half asleep, an image or an idea or a scene, and that becomes the dream which has to be interpreted and so on, so on, so on. So, when one is aware, watching, looking, not interpreting, choicelessly, all things, you will find for yourself, you don't dream at all. Because you have understood everything as you're going along. Wait, I'm not finished, madam. Look, Please, if you understand one question, you have understood all the questions. This question which we are asked, which has been asked, is whether the conscious mind can examine the unconscious, can look into something which is hidden. Whether it can analyze. And it can, obviously. It can see the motives, the reactions in relationship and so on. It can obviously analyze. And this process of analyzing what is part of the whole field, and that part is in the another corner of that field, which is called the unconscious, and which we make so much ado about, that can be examined very quietly, without analysis, by just watching the whole field. And the whole field is the conscious, and therefore the whole field is limited. The whole area is limited because there is always the center, the observer, the sensor, the watcher, the thinker. And you can only observe the whole field, what is called the unconscious and the conscious, which are on that field, only when there is no observer at all, when there is no attempt to change what is, but be totally attentive, completely attentive of the whole field, then you will find out for yourself there is no such thing as the unconscious. And there is nothing to be examined. It's there to look, only we don't know how to look, and we don't want to look. And when we do look, we want to change it to our pleasure, to our idiosyncrasies, to our inclination, which becomes terribly personal. And that's what interests most of us, to be personal.
Sir, when one is in the state of a quiet mind and makes some discoveries, are these discoveries to be treated any differently from the rest of the experience?
Obviously not, sir. When the quiet mind discovers something, are those to be examined or to be treated like any other experience, like any other thing? A quiet mind, a still mind, never experiences. It's only the observer that experiences. Therefore, it is not a still mind. Yes, sir.
To see the fault as fault and to differentiate that between what is observed is realize that this is not true. It's a very difficult concept to observe.
Yes, sir. As long as you have concepts, you never see what is truth. Yes, madam.
My main trouble is that I can't stay aware for a long enough period of time, maybe a few seconds, a few minutes, and I fall asleep. And this has been going on for years, and I'm wondering,
The questioner says, I can't be aware for a long period. I'm aware 1 or 2 seconds, and then the rest of the time I'm asleep and I struggle. You see, to be attentive at the moment of aware, attentive, at that moment, when you are aware, is enough. But when you say, I must extend it, keep it going, then the trouble begins. Then you want it as a pleasure.
Sir, if there is no unconscious...
Wait, sir. You see, behind this question lies the desire to have something permanently. A permanent awareness, a permanent state of attention. What is important is to be aware, to be attentive completely at that moment. It may last 1 second. Completely aware. And next second you may be inattentive. But know also you are inattentive. Don't say inattention must become attention. And thereby you introduce conflict. And therefore, in that conflict, awareness, attention completely ends. Yes, sir?
Sir, if there is no such thing as the unconscious mind and unconscious thinking, how do you explain such phenomena as post-hypnotic suggestion?
Yes, sir, those post-hypnotic, I know, yes, sir, that's clear. Look, sir, I mean, one can't please. This requires, when I said there is no such thing as the unconscious, I have been saying, don't accept what is said. Let's look into it. Neither accepting nor denying. Your questions are what happens after hypnosis and so on, through hypnosis, is very explainable, all still within the field of the known conscious. So what is important in all this, in asking questions and the answers or the explanations, is that the explanation has no value at all. What has value is how you ask the question and what you're expecting out of that question. If you are attentive of what you are asking, you will see that question is answered without any difficulty. Therefore, there is no teacher, you are everything yourself, both the teacher, the pupil, everything. That gives you tremendous freedom to inquire,